It's just a crazy Japan thing. A young British teacher, bright, adventurous, embracing life in Tokyo, she dismissed. The chilling feeling of being watched, that naive trust, that fatal misjudgment of danger would lead her to a horror beyond imagination. Just days later, Lindsay's body was found, not in a quiet grave, but meticulously, grotesquely planted in a bathtub on a balcony, buried in soil, mixed with fertilizer, with flower seeds scattered on top, as if intended to blossom from her remains. But the desecration didn't end there. Her head was shaved bald, her beautiful hair neatly tucked away in a plastic bag, while wigs belonging to her killer were found nearby. Who could commit such an act of ritualistic horror? And what kind of twisted mind, after escaping from 9 police officers, would then spend 2.5 years on the run, using scissors to hack off his own lips, a utility knife to gouge out moles, and a needle and thread to reshape his nose, in a desperate, gruesome attempt to erase his very identity? This isn't just a crime story. This is a terrifying descent into the darkest corners of human obsession, depravity, and a shocking, unsolved mystery continues to haunt us. Our story begins with 2 lives on vastly different paths, destined to tragically intertwine in the spring of 2007. First, there was Lindsay Ann Hawker, a vibrant 22-year-old from Coventry, England, full of wanderlust and a thirst for new experiences. Lindsay had moved to Tokyo in October 2006 to teach English at the Nova School. She was bright, adventurous, and, like many young people discovering a new culture, she found Japan to be incredibly safe, even remarking to her family back home how secure she felt. To save on rent, she'd eventually moved to Chiba, sharing an apartment with 2 other foreign teachers. Lindsay was building a life, making friends, and embracing her journey. She was exactly the kind of person you'd imagine thriving in such an exciting, bustling city. Then there was Tatsuya Ichihashi, born in Gifu Prefecture, Japan, in 1979. Ichihashi came from a privileged background. His father was a doctor, his mother a dentist, a picture of respectability and success. Yet despite graduating from Chiba University with a degree in horticulture in 2005, Ichihashi never truly applied himself. He lived off a monthly allowance from his parents, seemingly content in a world of his own making. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, there were disturbing cracks. Before March 2007, Ichihashi had faced charges for attacking a woman in a street robbery, a case that was quietly settled out of court when his father paid a hefty 1 million yen, roughly $11,000 USD, to the victim. He'd also received an official warning for stalking another woman during his university days. These weren't isolated incidents. They were early, chilling warnings of a deeper, unsettling instability that few truly recognized. Friends later described him as solitary, withdrawn, a hikikomori, a term for those who isolate themselves socially to an extreme degree. He was obsessed with violent manga and anime, and maintained an intense exercise regimen, running 25 kilometers daily and spending hours at the gym. These habits, seemingly innocuous at the time, would later become critical On this day, Tatsuya Ichihashi approached Lindsay Hawker. On a train, he introduced himself, falsely claiming to be one of her students. Lindsay, ever polite, engaged with him. He followed her all the way back to her apartment in Chiba. At her door, he asked for a glass of water. Now, here's where Lindsay's intelligence and caution shone through. Despite her inherent trust in Japan's safety, she didn't just let him in. Her two roommates were home, and Dolisi deliberately allowed Ichihashi inside only when they were present. She wanted witnesses. She wanted them to see his face. A silent precaution in case anything felt amiss. What happened next seemed almost disarmingly normal. Ichihashi, a seemingly talented artist, drew a portrait of Lindsay. On it, he wrote his name, phone number, and email address. He then proposed private English lessons, offering 3,500 yen, about 32 United States dollars, an hour. Lindsay agreed to meet him at a cafe a few days later. It was a seemingly professional interaction, small, hopeful step in her new career, but looking back, this simple act of caution, letting her roommates see him, getting his details, would later become the vital breadcrumbs that led police to him. It's a tragic irony that her initial smart choices wouldn't ultimately be enough. Days later, Lindsay met Ichihashi at a cafe for their first tutoring session. After about an hour, Ichihashi claimed he'd forgotten his wallet at home. He convinced Lindsay to accompany him back to his apartment to retrieve the money. Lindsay, perhaps seeing no immediate threat, agreed, but crucially, she asked her taxi driver to wait for her outside. This detail reveals her clear intention. She was just popping in, not planning to stay. She thought she'd be right back out, but a few minutes turned into too long. The taxi driver, unaware of the horror unfolding inside, eventually drove away. This was the last time Lindsay Ann Hawker was seen alive by anyone other than her killer. When Lindsay failed to show up for work that afternoon and didn't return to her apartment, her roommates grew increasingly worried. They reported her missing that evening, triggering the initial stages of a search that would soon grip two nations. By March 26th, Lindsay hadn't shown up for work for a second day. Panic set in. Her school contacted her parents in England, and the police investigation intensified. Officers began questioning Lindsay's roommates, who, thanks to Lindsay's initial caution, were able to provide Ichihashi's name and that fateful portrait he had drawn. This led police to quickly identify Ichihashi using surveillance footage from the Cafe Mall Hall. In the afternoon, two police officers arrived at Ichihashi's apartment. A neighbor confirmed he was inside and even allowed the officers to peer into the apartment from their own balcony. What they saw was deeply unsettling. Ichihashi's portable bathtub was out on his balcony. This sight, combined with Lindsay's disappearance, immediately raised alarm bells. The officers, an early warning fluttering in their gut, called for backup, as they suspected they might be dealing with more than just a missing person, perhaps a kidnapping, or something far worse. As evening descended on March 26th, the situation escalated. 7 more officers converged on the building, bringing the total police presence to 9 surrounding Ichihashi's apartment. The air was thick with tension. Every officer was on edge, aware of the gravity of the situation. They meticulously prepared to raid the residence, planning their entry, their movements, the critical steps to secure the scene and hopefully find Lindsay alive. The moments before a raid are always charged, but this one felt different, weighted with an unspoken dread. What happened next would become one of the most glaring and widely criticized failures in Japanese police history. As the officers geared up to storm the apartment, Tatsuya Ichihashi, with an almost supernatural burst of desperation, burst out of his front door. He was barefoot, carrying a large backpack, and moving with an animalistic speed born of pure survival instinct. Incredibly, astonishingly, he managed to evade all 9 officers. He scrambled down the complex stairwell, a blur of motion, and dashed out onto the street, vanishing into the finish maze of the city night. The officers, caught entirely off guard, scrambled after him, but he was too fast, too desperate. They did manage to grab his backpack, a small consolation, but the man himself was gone. This catastrophic failure meant Ichihashi, a suspected murderer, would remain at large for nearly 2.5 years. A shocking testament to police disorganization and Ichihashi's chilling cunning. The frustration and fury among the investigators, and later the public, would be immense. Immediately after his impossible escape, police finally entered the apartment, a sense of grim foreboding hanging heavy in the air. What they found within this seemingly ordinary residence was a scene of unimaginable brutality and grotesque planning. Lindsay Hawker's naked, battered, and bound body was discovered in the portable bathtub on the balcony. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a horrifying tableau. She had been gagged with a scarf, her hands and feet tied with gardening wire, the kind you might use for roses or tomatoes. Bruises across her body indicated a prolonged and savage attack, a desperate struggle for survival. The cartilage in her neck was broken, a chilling sign of strangulation, but the horror didn't stop there. The scene revealed a mind beyond comprehension. Her head had been shaved bald, her beautiful hair placed neatly in a plastic bag. The bathtub itself, serving as a makeshift coffin, was filled with a macabre mixture of sand, dirt, and compost, and most disturbing, most utterly sickening, flower seeds had been meticulously scattered on the surface, as if Ichihashi intended for a morbid garden to grow. Nourished by Lindsay's remains, it suggested a chilling, almost ritualistic desire to transform his crime scene into something natural, something hidden in plain sight inside the apartment. Police also found several wigs, adding another layer of chilling mystery to the already gruesome discovery and fueling early, dark theories about the killer's motives. The atmosphere at the scene was one of profound shock and revulsion, 'cause even for hardened investigators, the sheer premeditation and depravity were palpable. The escape of Tatsuya Ichihashi triggered a nationwide manhunt that lasted for an astonishing 2.5 years. The Japanese police launched an intense search, plastering wanted posters everywhere. These posters became iconic, showing his Ichihashi in potential disguises, including some hauntingly unsettling ones where he was depicted possibly dressed as a woman, fueling rampant public speculation and bizarre theories about his identity. A reward of 1,000,000 yen was initially offered for information leading to his capture, a sum that later swelled to a substantial 10,000,000 yen, roughly $121,000, $127,000 USD, as public and international pressure mounted. But Ichihashi wasn't merely hiding. He was actively, horrifically transforming himself, driven by an obsessive fear of capture after seeing his own face plastered on wanted posters. He embarked on a grotesque, self-inflicted journey of self-mutilation using common household items. He committed unspeakable acts upon himself with scissors. He brutally cut off a portion of his own lower lip, an act so agonizing he admitted he had to do it twice because the first attempt was too painful. He took a utility knife to gouge out 2 prominent moles on his left cheek, precisely where he knew they'd been photographed for identification, and with an almost surgical precision using a needle and thread, he meticulously stitched his nose narrower, chillingly describing it like a chef trussing meat. These weren't the acts of someone merely trying to change their appearance. They were the desperate, agonizing measures of a man consumed by the need to vanish without a trace, inflicting unimaginable pain upon himself to escape justice. The sheer willpower to endure such self-inflicted torture paints a terrifying picture of his desperate resolve. During these years, Ichihashi became a phantom, a ghost in plain sight, wandering across the vast expanse of Japan, from the snow-capped northern reaches of Aomori to the subtropical islands of Okinawa. He moved constantly, never staying in one place for long. He lived on a remote island off Okinawa on 4 separate occasions, surviving by foraging for wild fruit, catching fish, kyush, and even eating snakes. A testament to his primal survival instincts, he found refuge in an old World War II bunker, further highlighting his resourcefulness and complete abandonment of a normal life. He took on various grueling construction jobs under false identities, meticulously accumulating nearly 1,000,000 yen, around 12,100 United States dollars. This money wasn't for comfort or a new life, but for further professional plastic surgery to refine his gruesome self-transformations. He underwent 2 such operations, one to give him a longer, narrower nose, and a second to raise the bridge of his nose, aiming to make him look more Western, further obscuring his original features. Perhaps the strangest and most psychologically unsettling detail from his time on the run was his bizarre spiritual pilgrimage. Ichihashi journeyed across the temples of Shikoku Island, a renowned spiritual journey in Japan, performing the arduous circuit. He claimed he was doing this in the hope that Lindsay Ann Hawker would come back to life. This deeply unsettling idea, he explained, came from a novel he'd read, where deceased individuals could be revived if someone thought of them while completing such a spiritual journey. This revealed a chilling, almost schizophrenic contradiction within his psyche. A brutal killer, performing affection for his victim while simultaneously disfiguring himself to escape accountability for her death. Another peculiar aspect of his evasion was how Japanese culture inadvertently aided him. After his self-surgeries, Ichihashi often wore multiple layers of surgical masks to conceal his healing scars and altered features. In Japan, particularly during the hay fever season in spring, wearing surgical masks is incredibly common, almost unremarkable. This widespread cultural norm allowed him to blend in, making his dramatic transformations less noticeable to the casual observer. An ironic twist of fate that granted him anonymity. As 2009 drew to a close, Ichihashi's luck began to run out. In October, he visited a clinic in Fukuoka, seeking to alter the shape of his mouth. A month later, on October 24th, 2009, he went to a clinic in Nagoya for another nose enhancement. It was here that a keen-eyed clinic employee noticed something off. The unusual scars on his left cheek, the very spots where he'd crudely removed his moles. Suspicion aroused. The employee discreetly reported their concerns to the police, providing crucial photos of Ichihashi's post-surgery altered face. It was the break investigators had desperately waited for on November 4th, 2009. Police, now armed with concrete new visuals, released these updated images of Ichihashi post-plastic surgery to the media. The net was visibly closing, and the public was urged to remain vigilant. 6 days later, on November 10th, 2009, Ichihashi saw the news reports featuring his new face on TV, and carefully constructed world began to crumble. His heart pounded with panic. He immediately checked out of his hotel. In a desperate final attempt at disguise, he frantically cut his hair, bought a cheap party costume complete with a fake beard, sideburns, and a mustache, and made his way to the Osaka ferry terminal, intending to escape to Okinawa, perhaps, to his familiar secluded island refuge. But it was too late. At the Osaka port, the public's vigilance, fueled by the new images, paid off. Either a sharp ferry employee or a vigilant passerby recognized him, even through his flimsy disguise. Police were quickly alerted and converged on the terminal. They approached him. The air crackled with tension after a tense 10 minutes of questioning and evasion. The game was finally up. He finally conceded. His voice resigned. "I am Ichihashi," and was taken into custody. The almost 3-year chilling manhunt was finally over. The news reverberated globally. Upon his arrest in November 2009, Ichihashi was initially charged with abandoning a body. Police stated he had confessed to attacking Lindsay Hawker and that she had died from her injuries, though he strategically chose not to formally plead guilty until his trial, reserving his options. Then came a truly controversial and unexpected development. On January 26, 2011, Ichihashi's 238-page book, titled Until the Arrest, was sensationally released by publisher Gentosha. In it, he admitted to taking Lindsay's life, but conspicuously, infuriatingly avoided any genuine explanation for his motive or detailed descriptions of the crime itself. Instead, the book focused almost entirely on his life on the run and his bizarre, macabre obsession with plastic surgery. He claimed the book was a gesture of remorse and, in a move that shocked many, offered to donate all the royalties to the Hawker family or to charity. The Hawker family, however, demonstrated their profound dignity and resolute refusal to be manipulated. They resolutely refused any money, stating that no amount could ever compensate for the unbearable loss of their daughter. This act by Ichihashi sparked widespread debate about ethics, true remorse, and the unsettling concept of a criminal profiting from their heinous acts. The highly anticipated trial of Tatsuya Ichihashi began on July 4th, 2011. He admitted to raping and killing Lindsay Hawker, but maintained his consistent, albeit unbelievable, defense that her death was accidental, occurring when he tried to silence her screams. Prosecutors, however, passionately argued the murder was intentional, asserting that he had in fact deliberately strangled Lindsay after raping her to ensure her silence. The evidence of Lindsay's injuries strongly supported the prosecution's claims of a brutal, intentional act. On July 21st, 2011, the Chiba District Court delivered its verdict, sentencing Tatsuya Ichihashi to life imprisonment for the rape and murder of Lindsay Ann Hawker. The prosecution had sought a life sentence. In his ruling, the judge declared that Ichihashi was not a born criminal, and being relatively young, at 32 years old, had an opportunity for rehabilitation, thus opting not to impose the death penalty. Lindsay's parents, having endured years of agony, expressed profound relief, feeling that justice had finally been served, though Bill Hawker had initially wished for the death penalty on August 2nd, 2011. Ichihashi's lawyers appealed the sentence, claiming it was too severe and reiterating his accidental strangulation defense. A final attempt to lessen his punishment, however. On April 11th, 2012, the Tokyo High Court decisively rejected Ichihashi's appeal, firmly upholding his life sentence. Lindsay's family again expressed their relief at this final decision, bringing a sense of closure to the long legal battle. Under Japanese law, Tatsuya Ichihashi will be eligible for parole consideration after serving a minimum of 10 years, a prospect that likely offers little comfort to those who remember Lindsay Ann Hawker. Twist the elusive motive, a killer's silence, and a court's interpretation, perhaps. The most fundamental and chilling unanswered question is, what was Tatsuya Ichihashi's true motive for killing Lindsay Ann Hawker? He admitted to sexually assaulting her and causing her death, but he has never, ever offered a clear, coherent, or psychologically convincing explanation for why he took her life. This silence, this void where motive should be, is perhaps the most disturbing twist of all. Consider this in his 238-page book. Until the arrest, Ichihashi dedicated entire chapters to his elaborate life on the run, his bizarre self-mutilations, and his desperate attempts to evade capture. He recounts in excruciating detail his physical pain and his calculated methods of concealment, yet when it came to the horrific act itself, the crime his mindset, no details of the struggle, and certainly no real explanation for his actions. He framed the book as a gesture of remorse, even offering them royalties to the Hawker family, who, understandably, vehemently refused. But how can there be true remorse without a confrontation of the core crime? This glaring omission by Ichihashi himself leaves investigators and the public constantly questioning what secrets was he truly trying to protect by remaining silent on the most crucial part of his story. It was a narrative choice that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. At trial, Ichihashi maintained a consistent, albeit deeply unsettling defense. Lindsay's death was an accident. He claimed she died from suffocation when he tried to silence her screams, fearing neighbors would hear it was, in his version, an unintended consequence of his attempt to gag her. This direct contradiction of the brutal scene found in the bathtub was a primary focus of the prosecution. Vehemently disagreed, arguing that the murder was premeditated, a deliberate act to silence Lindsay after the sexual assault. The evidence of a prolonged, brutal attack, the extensive bruising on her body, the fractured cartilage in her neck consistent with strangulation, painted a picture far more sinister than an accidental suffocation during a struggle. The forensic evidence, the sheer physical trauma Lindsay endured, spoke volumes, directly refuting Ichihashi's passive narrative. The judge, in delivering the verdict, dismissed Ichihashi's explanations as irrational statements, unnatural, and inconsistent with the evidence, concluding that he had, in fact, murdered Lindsay to conceal his sexual assault. Court's rejection of his story, however, doesn't fully answer why he committed the act in the first place, only how it likely ended. So where does the truth lie? Was Ichihashi truly incapable of articulating his dark motivations? A profound psychological blank? Or was he deliberately manipulating the narrative to avoid the full weight of his actions, to evade the death penalty? The fact that a man can commit such a heinous act, then painstakingly recount years of evasion, but completely gloss over the why of the murder itself, leaves us with a profound sense of unease. It suggests a psychological void, a fundamental disconnect between action and introspection, or perhaps a cunning calculation to protect his own narrative. This unresolved why cast a long shadow over the entire case, frustrating those seeking genuine closure. The unfathomable. Police blunders. 9 officers, 1 barefoot escape. This is perhaps the most infuriating and baffling twist in the entire case. How did 9 Japanese police officers surrounding a single apartment allow a barefoot, unarmed suspect to escape right from under their noses? This wasn't just a misstep, it was an astonishing, almost unbelievable display of incompetence that turned a contained situation into a sprawling international manhunt. Let's rewind to the evening of March 26, 2007. Police had identified Ichihashi. They had concrete intelligence that he was inside his apartment. 2 officers had even peered in from a neighbor's balcony, confirming his presence and spotting the suspicious bathtub. Reinforcements were called, bringing the total police presence to 9 officers. officers strategically positioned around the building. They were there to apprehend a suspect in what was rapidly escalating into a potential homicide. They had him cornered. Seemingly, the expectation was a swift, decisive apprehension. Yet, as they prepared to storm the apartment, Tatsuya Ichihashi simply burst out. Barefoot, carrying a backpack, he sprinted down the complex stairwell, a blur of desperate motion, slipping past highly trained officers who were, by all accounts, completely unprepared for his sudden, audacious break. He vanished into the labyrinthine streets of the city night. The officers, caught entirely off guard, scrambled after him, but he was too fast, too desperate. They managed only to grab his backpack, a meager trophy from a catastrophic failure. This inexcusable blunder meant Ichihashi, a suspected murderer, would remain at large for nearly 2.5 years, prolonging the nightmare for Lindsay's family and turning a local law investigation into a global embarrassment. The official explanations offered were vague and too many, unsatisfying. A lack of proper communication equipment among the officers, the complex layout of the apartment building, a general lack of organization, and perhaps a failure to fully grasp the extreme urgency of the situation at that precise moment. These reasons felt flimsy for such a massive high-stakes error. How could a seasoned police force, known for its efficiency, make such a catastrophic mistake? Did they underestimate him? Were they simply caught off guard by his desperate, sudden dash for freedom? The image of 9 officers failing to contain one man, especially when a young woman's life was at stake, remains a dark stain on the initial investigation, sparking accusations of apathy and negligence. This police incompetence didn't just complicate the investigation, it fundamentally derailed it, sending Ichihashi into an almost 3-year odyssey of evasion. The initial reaction to Lindsay's disappearance was already criticized as being slow and apathetic. And perhaps most damning, there were reports that police interest in the case waned when public pressure subsided. It wasn't until Bill and Julia Hawker, Lindsay's parents, tirelessly flew to Japan, spent their life savings, and relentlessly pressured authorities and the media, that the case remained in the spotlight in a desperate act of paternal love and mounting frustration with the official response. Bill Hawker even reportedly approached the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, to bring them 2 bottles of whiskey as a plea for their assistance in finding his daughter's killer. The sheer desperation of a grieving father turning to organized crime for help underscores the profound distrust and disappointment he felt in the official channels. The true extent and precise reasons for these initial failings remain an alarming, unresolved question about the very foundations of the investigation, the horrific self-mutilation, and the twisted resurrection wish. This is where the case veers sharply into the realm of profound psychological disturbance, a twist that speaks to an almost unimaginable level of desperation and a fractured mental state. During his 2.5-year flight from justice, Ichihashi subjected himself to a series of gruesome amateur self-surgeries acts that agonizing, self-inflicted erasure of identity, he used common household items, inflicting unspeakable pain upon himself. With scissors, he brutally cut off a portion of his own lower lip, an act so agonizing he admitted he had to do it twice because the first attempt was too painful. He took a utility knife to gouge out the prominent moles on his left cheek, precisely where he knew they'd been photographed for wanted posters, and, perhaps most disturbingly, with an almost chilling precision, using a needle and thread, he meticulously stitched his nose narrower, chillingly describing it like a chef dressing meat. All of this was done without any medical knowledge, without anesthetic, in excruciating pain. The sheer willpower to endure such self-inflicted torture, driven by a primal fear of capture, paints a terrifying picture of his desperate resolve, and a mind pushed to its absolute limits. But then the twist takes an even stranger, more surreal turn. Twined with these acts of self-erasure was a bizarre quest for atonement, or, more accurately, resurrection. Ichihashi embarked on a strange spiritual pilgrimage across the 88 temples of Shikaku Island, a renowned spiritual journey in Japan, performing the arduous circuit. He claimed he was doing this in the hope that Lindsay Ann Hawker would come back to life. This deeply unsettling idea, he explained, came from a novel he'd read where deceased individuals could be revived if someone thought of them while completing such a spiritual journey. This detail presents a profound psychological contradiction. How can a man capable of such cold-blooded murder, of meticulously burying a body with gardening supplies, simultaneously believe in a fantastical, almost childlike belief in spiritual revival for his victim? Is it a genuine, albeit deeply diluted attempt at repentance, a desperate attempt to find peace for his soul, however misguided? Or is it another layer of his manipulative facade, a way to rationalize his monstrous acts through a distorted spiritual lens, perhaps even to convince himself he wasn't truly a monster? This combination of extreme calculated brutality and almost delusional spirituality points towards a complex, fractured, and truly alien psyche, a puzzle that continues to defy complete understanding. This psychological enigma remains one of the case's most haunting, unresolved elements: the shaved head and the whispers of Wigs, a disturbing, unsolved riddle among the many disturbing details found at Ichihashi's apartment. Few sparked as much morbid curiosity and speculation as Lindsay Ann Hawker's shaved head and the discovery of Wigs within his living space. When Lindsay's body was found, her long, beautiful hair had been completely shorn off, then carefully placed into a plastic bag alongside this chilling discovery. Police also found several wigs in Ichihashi's apartment, adding an immediate, unsettling layer of confusion to the already horrific scene. This immediately ignited a torrent of dark rumors and theories that swirled through the media and online forums. Was Ichihashi a crossdresser, and was this act linked to some perverse fantasy? Was he obsessed with women's hair? Had he murdered Lindsay specifically to harvest her hair to make Wigs for himself or for some other twisted purpose. Some sources even claimed that police had released digitally altered photos of Ichihashi in women's clothing during the manhunt, further fueling these disturbing narratives and creating a perplexing image of the killer. While the police initially hypothesized he might be a cross-dresser, no definitive evidence ever confirmed this as a direct motive for the murder or the specific chilling act of shaving her head. Ichihashi himself never offered a clear, coherent explanation for this particular act of desecration in his testimony or his book. It remains one of the most grotesque and profoundly unanswered questions of the case. What truly compelled him to shave her head? Was it a perverse desire for ultimate control, a final act of stripping her identity and humanity? Was there a deeper, more disturbing sexual fetish at play involving hair or wigs that was never fully revealed? Or was it simply another cold, calculated attempt to make identification more difficult despite the abundance of other overwhelming evidence linking him to the crime? The mystery surrounding Lindsay's shaved head adds a chilling, almost ritualistic layer to the brutality, leaving us to grapple with the unknown depths of Ichihashi's twisted, unfathomable mind, the remorse that wasn't a battle over Ichihashi's true state. Finally, a major twist lies in the highly contentious issue of Tatsuya Ichihashi's alleged remorse and his potential for rehabilitation, which stood in stark contrast to the profound skepticism of the court and, most importantly, Lindsay's grieving family. This conflict highlights a deep chasm between perception and reality, and the challenges of truly understanding a killer's internal landscape. Ichihashi consistently presented his book, until the arrest, as a gesture of remorse. He even offered the substantial royalties to the Hawker family, a move seen by some as a genuine attempt at apology. This was his carefully constructed narrative. A man who had committed a terrible act, but who was now, through sharing his story of flight, attempting to show contrition and perhaps gain a measure of public understanding. However, court, in its judgment, delivered a scathing assessment of this supposed remorse. The judge stated that Ichihashi's explanations for Lindsay's death were irrational statements, unnatural and inconsistent with the evidence, and that he had not truly regretted his actions from the bottom of his heart. This was a powerful indictment from the bench, directly challenging Ichihashi's carefully crafted public image of a repentant sinner. It suggested that even after years, the legal system saw through his facade, recognizing a lack of genuine empathy or accountability. Lindsay's family, having endured years of agony and battled for answers, echoed this sentiment with unwavering conviction. They firmly believed that Ichihashi showed no remorse whatsoever. Their decision to resolutely reject any money from his book sales was a powerful statement that no financial compensation, no self-serving narrative could ever atone for their profound loss. They saw his book and his remorse as nothing more than a cynical attempt to profit from his crime and manipulate public perception, adding insult to an already grievous injury. This leaves us with a critical, unresolved question. What was the true nature of Ichihashi's psychological state? Was he a master manipulator, cunningly feigning remorse to mitigate his sentence and project a more favorable image? God, or was there a deeply fragmented individual whose own understanding of guilt and repentance was so profoundly warped that he genuinely believed his actions, including his book, constituted a form of atonement, a path to absolution in his own mind? The court's decision not to impose the death penalty, citing his relatively young age and a small chance that he could be rehabilitated, is particularly contentious given their simultaneous dismissal of his remorse. This complex interplay of judicial interpretation, a killer's ambiguous claims, and a family's unwavering disbelief creates a deeply unsettling and unresolved facet of the case, forcing us to ponder the true capacity for change within such a disturbed individual. The answer to his true state of mind and the nature of his remorse remains locked within the confines of his own fractured psyche. Analysis: the disturbing psychology of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Pathology. Tatsuya Ichihashi presents a chilling study in contradictions, a stark illustration of how deep-seated psychological issues can fester, even within a seemingly ideal environment. Born into an affluent family with a father who was a doctor and a mother a dentist, he enjoyed financial security and privilege, yet this background, often associated with stability and opportunity, failed to prevent his disturbing trajectory. Instead, he epitomized the phenomenon of the hikikomori, an individual marked by extreme social withdrawal and isolation, pressing social concern. In modern Japan, this was not merely shyness, it was an almost pathological retreat from the world. Fostering a detachment from conventional social realities and the empathy that binds communities, his disturbing behavioral patterns, evident long before Lindsay's murder, suggest an escalating pathology that, when unchecked, the prior accusation of armed robbery against a woman, resolved quietly through parental financial intervention and a formal warning for stalking another university student, serve as glaring red flags. These weren't isolated missteps, they were a disturbing progression of aggression and obsession. The fact that his family's wealth could, in a sense, bite off consequences for these early transgressions raises profound questions about social accountability and whether privilege inadvertently enabled his unchecked deterioration. His own reported admission to acquaintances about feeling mentally unstable now reads as a haunting premonition of the terror he would unleash. His actions during the crime itself, as interpreted by the court, suggest a cold, calculated premeditation to conceal sexual assault. The brutality of the attack, culminating in a fractured neck, speaks to a chilling capacity for extreme violence. This wasn't a crime of passion. It bore the hallmarks of a controlled, if deranged, intent. Perhaps the most perplexing aspect of Ichihashi's psychology, and a central psychological twist of the case, is his behavior while on the run. His extreme self-mutilation, the gruesome acts of cutting his own lips, gouging out moles, reshaping his nose demonstrates an almost pathological level of determination to evade capture. This wasn't merely about disguise, it was an agonizing, self-inflicted erasure of identity, revealing a profound fear that transcended physical pain. It prompts us to consider the depths of a desperate mind, driven by an instinct for self-preservation so powerful it overrides any sense of personal integrity or basic well-being. Such acts often suggest severe body dysmorphia, a fractured sense of self, or a desperate attempt to externalize an internal chaos. Then there's the profoundly bizarre spiritual pilgrimage to Shikaku, seeking Lindsay's resurrection. This act, deeply rooted in fiction, yet performed in earnest, introduces a deeply unsettling dichotomy. How can a man capable of such cold-blooded murder, of meticulously burying a body with gardening supplies, simultaneously harbor such a fantastical, almost childlike belief in spiritual revival for his victim? Is it a twisted, deeply deluded attempt at repentance, an attempt to cleanse his soul without true accountability? Or is it a manifestation of a severely distorted reality where he views himself not as a murderer, but as a protagonist in his own warped narrative, capable of defying the finality of death through a ritualistic act? This blend of extreme, calculated brutality and almost delusional spirituality points towards a complex, fractured, and truly alien psyche, a puzzle that continues to defy complete understanding. Societal context and public reaction, challenging assumptions, failing vulnerabilities. The murder of Lindsay Ann Hawker sent profound shockwaves across both Japan and the UK, not only for its sheer brutality, but for what it represented on a broader societal level. Lindsay herself had found Japan to be safe and trustworthy, even safer than England. This tragedy profoundly challenged Japan's long-held self-perception and international reputation as an exceptionally safe and orderly society. It served as a stark, undeniable reminder that even in seemingly idyllic environments, dark crimes, including those of an incredibly bizarre and violent nature, can and do occur. This case, therefore, became a catalyst for introspection, forcing a revaluation of assumptions about public safety and the universality of human malevolence. The initial stages of the investigation were met with widespread and vocal criticism regarding the Japanese police's handling of the case. Accusations of fumbling, incompetence, and a general lack of interest in the early stages were rampant. The most glaring failure, allowing Ichihashi to escape from a 9-officer perimeter, fueled immense public frustration and embarrassment. This incident wasn't merely an isolated blunder, it underscored potential systemic issues within Japanese law enforcement at the time, particularly concerning coordinated response, effective communication, and possibly an initial underestimation of the severity of the situation. It spurred calls for greater transparency and efficiency in high-profile investigations, influencing public trust in state institutions. Crucially, it was the unyielding resolve of Lindsay's family that fundamentally altered the trajectory of this case. reportedly approaching the Yakuza for assistance were paramount in keeping the case alive and maintaining pressure on authorities. Their advocacy highlights a critical, often exhausting, reality that families of victims sometimes must become their own most vocal champions, pushing for justice when official channels appear to falter. Their efforts transformed a local tragedy into an international cause, a powerful testament to familial love in the face of bureaucratic inertia. The substantial reward offered by the police eventually increased. Also attests to the mounting pressure that the family, media, and public successfully generated. Perhaps one of the most disturbing social phenomena to emerge from this case was the idolization of a criminal online. Despite being a murderer, Tatsuya Ichihashi developed a strange, most cult-like following on the internet. He was dubbed Japan's most handsome criminal, the melancholy fugitive prince, and Lord Ichi fan clubs, blogs, and support groups dedicated to him sprang up, some even romanticizing his actions. This phenomenon, particularly prevalent among younger internet users, raises profound and unsettling questions about the glamorization of notoriety, the dangerous allure of anti-hero figures, and the worrying trend of romanticizing extreme behaviors online. It's a stark reminder of how public perception can be distorted, sometimes elevating a perpetrator to a perverse celebrity status simply due to their infamy or the sheer audacity of their actions. A chilling commentary on certain aspects of contemporary internet culture and the ethics of digital engagement with true crime, judicial process, and the paradox of punishment, justice's complex equation. The verdict in Ichihashi's trial also sparked significant debate, particularly concerning the question of punishment and the concept of rehabilitation within the Japanese legal system. Lindsay's parents had consistently called for the maximum penalty, which in Japan, where such a heinous crime would be the death penalty by hanging. Their desire for ultimate retribution was understandable, born from immeasurable grief and a quest for absolute justice. Aligning with a more retributive view of justice, however, the Japanese court ultimately sentenced Ichihashi to life imprisonment. The judge's reasoning was critical and sparked considerable contention. He stated that Ichihashi was not a born criminal, that he was still young, 32, at the time of sentencing, gay, and that there was a small chance he could be rehabilitated. This decision reflects a nuanced, albeit controversial, aspect of Japanese jurisprudence, which often considers the potential for rehabilitation even in brutal murder cases, especially for first-time offenders of this specific type. It speaks to a philosophical approach that, while acknowledging the severity of the crime, also attempts to preserve a future possibility, however remote, for transformation. This raises a crucial paradox. How can a court acknowledge the heinous nature of a crime, dismiss the perpetrators, claims of remorse as irrational and not from the heart, yet still find a small chance for rehabilitation that justifies withholding the ultimate punishment? This tension highlights the philosophical complexities inherent in criminal justice systems worldwide, balancing retribution, deterrence, and the slim hope of an individual's transformation. For Lindsay's family, this legal subtlety likely offered little comfort in the face of their profound loss, leaving a lingering sense of incompletion, a feeling that while justice was served, it wasn't the absolute justice they sought. It underscores the perpetual debate about what constitutes true justice, and whether rehabilitation is ever truly possible for those who commit acts of such profound evil. Conclusion: the case of the self-mutilating killer, Tatsuya Ichihashi, is not just a shocking crime story. It's a chilling exploration of the darkest corners of human psychology and a stark reflection of societal responses to unspeakable acts. As we draw this narrative to a close, we are left with more questions than answers. Forced to grapple with unsettling truths and lingering ambiguities, unanswered questions, unsettling truths, the timeline of events, though meticulously pieced together, leaves gaping holes in our understanding. The fundamental questions remain: what truly motivated Ichihashi? What drove a man from a privileged background to commit such a brutal and bizarre act? Was his claim of accidental death a lie, masking a far more sinister reality? How could Japanese police fail so spectacularly? How did 9 officers allow a barefoot suspect to escape? Was their initial response a symptom of systemic issues, a failure to recognize the urgency of the situation? What was the meaning behind Ichihashi's self-mutilation? Was it simply a desperate attempt to evade capture? Or did it point to a deeper, more disturbing psychological break? Was Ichihashi genuinely remorseful? Was his book a sincere attempt at atonement, or a calculated manipulation to garner sympathy and lessen his sentence? What is the significance of the shaved head and the wigs? Was this a gruesome act of desecration, a clue to a disturbing fetish, or simply another bizarre detail in a case overflowing with them? Lessons from the darkness. The case of Lindsay Ann Hawker serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the capacity for evil that can lurk beneath a veneer of normalcy, and the enduring importance of vigilance. It teaches us evil can exist anywhere. Lindsay, like many, believed in the inherent safety of Japan. This case shattered that illusion, demonstrating that darkness can penetrate even the most seemingly secure environments. Apathy can be deadly. The initial sluggish response from law enforcement allowed Ichihashi to escape, prolonging the agony for Lindsay's family and fueling public outrage. Indifference, whether from institutions or individuals, can have devastating consequences. Justice is not always absolute. Despite Ichihashi's life sentence, many still feel that true justice was not served. The case raises complex questions about the balance between punishment and rehabilitation, and the limitations of the legal system in addressing profound loss. Resilience can be a powerful force. The unwavering determination of the Hawker family in their pursuit of justice is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Their tireless efforts kept the case in the public eye and ultimately contributed to Ichihashi's capture and conviction. Final reflection: the murder of Lindsay Ann Hawker is a tragedy that continues to resonate. Let us remember Lindsay, a young woman full of promise, whose life was brutally cut short. Let us honor the resilience of her family, who fought tirelessly for justice in the face of unimaginable grief. And as we close this chapter, let us ask ourselves, what have we learned from this case? Can we prevent such tragedies from happening again? Can we build a society that is both safer and more just, where the potential for such darkness is minimized? A lingering thought: